In Japan, hidden rooms aren't just a horror trope. They crop up in old apartments, post-war houses, and even renovated storefronts. Sometimes they're deliberate, tourist ninja homes with trick doors and crawl spaces. Sometimes they're accidents of construction, service voids, seismic retrofits, or corridors extended during a refit. And sometimes they're the aftermath of something people don't want to talk about. There are real cases of long-term confinement that haunt the public record. In 2017, Osaka police arrested a couple after their 33-year-old daughter was found dead in a tiny locked room where she had been confined for years. The space was purpose-built, with restricted access and a covered window. Go back further and you'll find the Niigata confinement case. A girl abducted at 9 and held 9 years in an upstairs room not far from a police box. An ordinary house hiding an extraordinary crime. Historically, families sometimes built zashikiro, a tatami room, a cell inside private homes to confine relatives during eras with limited psychiatric care. It's a dark chapter tied to the practice of private confinement, shitaku kanshi, which lingered into the 20th century before modern mental health laws caught up. On the real estate side, Japan also has jikobukken, stigmatized properties, which we have explored a lot on this channel. After a traumatic death, landlords may renovate hard, alter layouts, or even wall off problematic spaces. Disclosure rules and the psychology of buyers shape how these places are handled, and why some end up being oddly planned. A blank wall where a door used to be, an intercom plate removed, a window that no longer serves a room. Of course, not every sealed place is sinister. Architects and contractors create thickened walls for pipes and wiring, sheer walls for earthquake resistance, fire corridors, or storage voids during refits. And yes, there are the playful exceptions. Heritage stays marketed with hidden panels and secret stairways. That mix, crime, custom, stigma, and sheer construction pragmatism, is why these stories feel so unsettling. The plan and the past don't always match, and buildings keep quiet better than people do. So if you're into true crime adjacent architecture, urban legends with a paper trail, and the eerie logic of strange floor plans, then you're in the right place. Subscribe and stick around. Let's open up these walls and ask why they were built in the first place. Here's the bells. I heard this from a friend in real estate, the careful type, the sort to notice more than the average person. Stuff like when a hinge plate's been flipped the wrong way. He went to inspect a mid-sized block that had just been refit. Fresh paint, new flooring, clean common areas. At the end of the second corridor there was a smooth plaster wall. No door, no odd patches, nothing that screamed cover up. Just the end. Two things nudged him. In the lobby, the laminated evacuation map, older than the refit, still showed the corridor, ending at a door with a small room behind. On that floor, the intercom position and the name slot that should have matched the unit were blanked off. From the street, the elevation still included a window, where that room would have been. Inside, it was wall. Back at the office, the seller's rep kept it short. There was an incident years ago, a single-parent household, turned tragic. During renovation, we extended the corridor and sealed off the room from the inside. Then he dropped one extra line. We had trouble with faint scratch-like marks on the wall by the window. They just kept coming back every time we repainted. My friend passed on that deal. But he did go back to that building once more that year and met a long-term resident by the lifts. Saito-san 60s, had a shopping bag on her arm. She remembered the old layout without needing to think. My friend asked a little bit more about the building since it was fresh on his mind. There used to be a door at the end, yeah, she said. A younger mother lived there for a bit. I'd hear humming, a lullaby, very soft, late some nights. Then one week the hallway was taped off. And after that, it was just wall. The manager removed the intercom plate and said, "It's for storage now." But I always thought, how can you use a room for storage if it doesn't have a door? She added in summer the corridor gets stuffy, but that end stays a touch cooler. It's kind of like there's air coming from behind the wall, she said. She wasn't making a point, just saying it the way people do when they've walked the same hall for years. The paperwork gave the rest of it shape without saying it out loud. In the management file there were a few notes and bits. One previous viewer, from before the refit, a student emailed to withdraw his interest the next day. No specific reason, just something didn't feel right. A small bundle of returned mail addressed to 2 different surnames months apart. On one envelope, someone had stamped "moved," and on another, just "not in." Tucked behind them, a school notice about lunch fees, never opened, and a health check form you sign for first-year students. Both addressed to the same unit, both still stapled together. A meter log showed a tiny nighttime drawer for a few weeks after the unit was vacant, like something plugged into a wall then unplugged and plugged in again, as if someone was using the electricity in there is what I think he means. The intercom index on the ground floor had a gap where the unit number should have run in sequence. None of it provides anything. It doesn't have to, it just points. A mother, alone, a child who should have been at school, a door that became a wall, an intercom taped from the inside, a ladder of faint marks where the paint refuses to be brand new, a neighbor who still catches herself listening for lullabies that she can't admit she heard through thin walls. No curses, no jump scare, just the part that sticks, a room turned into silence so the building could be ordinary again. And I guess you could all use your imagination to find out what happened in that room without anyone having to say it out loud. If you ever find yourself in a corridor like that, a clean end where your memory insists there used to be a door, maybe you don't need to force a theory. You don't need one. Some stories are kept small on purpose. And sometimes the only honest thing a wall can do is let a pattern come back, just enough to tell you that there was once a hand on the other side. This is something I heard from my friend Satoru. He used to work for a real estate company with a shaky reputation, the kind rental forums love to hate. He joined straight out of high school. About 6 months in, his friend Takumi asked for a place, cheap, close to the station. Satoru found an older, wooden apartment, 6 tatami Japanese style room and a 4.5 tatami Western style room. Separate bath and toilet, prefab unit bath. Takumi viewed it, signed, moved in. Done deal. By March, Masato, a friend of both, came up to Tokyo and crashed there until he found work and a room. Takumi took the bed. Masato laid his futon beside it. A few nights in, Masato asked to sleep in the other room, the Japanese style room. "Sorry," he said, "but something comes out of that closet every night. I can ignore TV through the wall. This, I can't. If I sleep where there's no closet, maybe it will stop. Or at least the nightmares." Takumi had noticed something. He'd warned Satoru many times, if you land me in a haunted place, I'm coming for you, so he brushed it off. Even so, around 3 a.m. each night, Masato, his friend staying with him, kept waking him, saying, "It's come back again," he'd say, flat, certain. Half convinced, they swapped places, and that night Masato shook him awake again and said, "It passed right by you, and then it still came to me." They argued, things got a bit heated, but then they cooled off. Masato suddenly asked, "Can we ask Satoru something? If somebody died next door?" Then Satoru came over after work, and Masato laid it all out. In short, it went like this. Around 3 a.m. something slides out of the Japanese-style closet, the oshiire, soundless, until it reaches his futon. It has no arms or legs. It's like a long black bag body with a head of white hair that doesn't resolve into a face. No words, just a held back cry. The kind old people make when they're trying not to trouble anyone. Sometimes, even daytime, a low sob or groan leaks from the closet or the wall shared with the next unit. Back when Takumi was out, Masato had quietly lifted the closet ceiling panel and floorboard, but he found nothing. Satoru had to remind the next door tenant about sorting his bins out anyway, so after a quick meal, the three of them went next door and knocked. A middle-aged man answered. He said he hadn't seen anything when asked, but he did say something. From Takumi's side, he said he sometimes hears stifled crying, like an old woman's voice, but he said that he no longer sees a wife at that unit. Did she move away and leave the old lady behind? The neighbor asked. Satoru told him that the previous tenants moved last year, and a student, his friend Takumi, lives there now. The man looked shaken and said, "Well, I sometimes hear the old woman being scolded." That's how it sounds, from your side, but if they're gone, whose voice is that? Back in the room, Takumi asked Satoru to arrange an inspection. First, Satoru tapped the panels around the oshiire, the closet. Most spots answered his knock with a hollow sound. The section between the closet and the bathroom answered with a slightly denser sound. It didn't seem right. So he pried off a piece of board. A yellow piece of nylon showed up in the gap. It looked like sleeping bag fabric. A bad feeling came over them, and they stopped what they were doing and called the landlord. More boards came off, the police arrived, and an officer worked the sleeping bag free with a heavy, sliding sound. The officer reached for the zipper, and then Takumi snapped, "No, not in my room." They carried it outside, and they opened it. Everyone present understood this was a case. Word travels fast in a block, but by the time the zip was down, uniformed officers were already taping off the corridor. An investigator spoke briefly with the landlord. Another started the chain of custody log. A third took photos of the closet cavity, the raw timber, the screw holes where the panel had been, the mark where the wall bowed. Because inside the bag was a body. Some might remember the headlines. Back then, more than 10 years ago, Japan had a run of cases tied to caregiver strain. Families overwhelmed, tragedies behind closed doors. This became one of those, the so-called mother-in-law salted and hidden case. From the file Satoru later saw, and from what the neighbors recalled, the outline was, before Takumi moved in, a wife lived with her mother-in-law, the husband's mother. The lease ran through October. The wife vacated in August. The husband had left the picture. He had another relationship, one behind her back. Then he disappeared. The wife and mother-in-law, his mother, moved into a smaller apartment. With no other family, the older woman depended on the couple. After the husband vanished, the wife became the caregiver. Over time, resentment and exhaustion grew. Neighbors later reported hearing scolding through thin walls. Reports said the older woman endured neglect and mistreatment. Investigators would later note injuries consistent with that. Injuries is a polite way to say it. Torture is another. Different ways. Different implements, different methods. Boiling water, sharp objects. Out of obligation, because the woman was so old, she still believed that her daughter-in-law, her ex-daughter-in-law, was the one looking after her, so the older woman didn't run, or perhaps couldn't run. One morning, the ex-wife found the older woman unresponsive on her futon. Panic makes people do practical things for the wrong reasons. She wrapped up the body in multiple bags, added a lot of pickling salt, a crude, old-fashioned way of trying to control odor and time, then slid the bundle into a sleeping bag. She removed the closet wall boards and shoved it into the partition void and closed it, and later, she moved out. Masato's description, the black bag shape, the white hair, the crying, stopped sounding like a nightmare and started sounding like a translation. The closet hadn't been a doorway, it had been a lid, a chamber. For a while after the discovery, the building woke at 3. Not every night, just often enough that the regulars noticed. A thin breath sound would find the seam, not asking for help, not angry, embarrassed crying. The kind older people make when they're trying not to trouble anyone anymore. Satoru remembers 2 details more than the rest. First, the neighbor's question. If that family's gone, then who does that voice belong to? The second, the way Masato said the shape never stepped around him as it crossed the room, like a person reduced to an outline being kept. It moved in a straight line because it couldn't move in any other way. Call it a haunting if you want. Satoru calls it leftover life, what a building keeps saying after a decision is made and a wall goes up. And when he thinks about it, he doesn't picture a monster. He pictures a presence that still leaves the closet at 3, because that was the only time it was ever allowed to move. My friend's father works in demolition. He took a job to tear down an old retail building, and during the job they realized there was a space that clearly had to be a room, yet there was no entrance to it anywhere. People started saying, maybe it's a sealed room, but work is work, so they broke through the wall. Inside they found a room about 2 tatami in size, boxed in on all 4 sides. There was a small household Buddhist altar with the doors shut. They opened it cautiously. There was nothing inside, not even a memorial tablet. Besides that, there was nothing else, nothing odd about the room itself. Afterward, the demolition finished without incident. No accidents, no illness that could be chalked up to a curse. The family who owned the place didn't know what the room had been for, and the room's true purpose remains unknown. My friend's father said, no ghosts, no curses, but that empty butsudan in that closed room, that was scary. I get it. If you were on site, it would feel scary. Hi, Jay here. This is an interesting sort of collection now, because the same poster comes back to add a bit more, and a few other comments join in, so I'll just throw them all together. Back to the story. While I'm at it, I might as well share a few other creepy experiences. This one is a first-hand scary story. I bought a used book, and inside it was what looked like a family photo. Father, mother, small child, but the faces of all three of them had been cut out. I don't know what that photo really was, but it scared me. What did I do with that photo? To be honest, it might still be somewhere in a pile of books in my room. There's another one I heard from a monk I know. Once in the temple cemetery, someone had thrown away a cremation urn, ashes still inside, into the trash bin. Nobody knew who put it there, but just in case, we reported it to the police. But in the end, we never found out whose it was. No matter the reason, the monk said. A person who puts human remains in a trash bin, that's scary. And I agree, that is scary. These kind of things, where details never get clear, and there isn't a huge dramatic horror event, but they stick in your memory, don't they? And I guess we all have a few like that. Hi Jay here comes the comments. Truth or not, I've heard about a room similar, or maybe the same as the room you mentioned, could be used for trapping Zashiki Warashi, a house spirit. Is like that. Apparently, there was a similar room in a derelict house in my hometown, on the second floor, and there was a strangely fancy Japanese doll in a glass case. I wonder what that doll was, now I'm curious. I think they embellished it a bit, but the room had been sealed with ofuda, protective talisman, stuck all over. Rumor had it, someone took a photo of the doll, checked it later in a park, and then suddenly convulsed and slid perfectly down a big slide. Everyone burst out laughing. That kind of punchline. Hi, I would just like to chime in here to share an experience with one of your sealed rooms there. On the flip side, about 30 odd years ago, I once built a kazuno ma, a sealed room about the size of one tatami. I don't really know what they put inside. I just temporarily fixed a single sheet of plasterboard, and the client said they would seal it and do the wallpaper. My task ended there. These rooms do exist. Well, that makes me wonder what happened next, but maybe I don't want to know. It looked like an old rental house. After about 10 years, there wasn't a trace left. I suspect Zashikiro, a tatami room prison. Once my father suddenly said, in the old days every house had a Zashikiro. Our main family is in Tohoku. Later when I asked him about that comment, he denied, saying, I never said such a thing, with a stony face. Hi. On a Tokyo renovation site, I was reading the drawings and the dimensions wouldn't add up. When I calculated, there was a spot where a wall was nearly 1 meter thick. A formwork carpenter or a shuttering joiner misread something, built a concrete form that way, and it ended up with a crazy thick wall. We chipped it out and fixed it, but in the end there was a hidden room you could only enter from the floor above. Hi, I'd like to add something. Similar thing at an animation studio. They rented an old house for studio use. In the back they found a room, like a zashikiro. It had plumbing and a toilet, and the structure was like a cell. The guess was, they had confined a family member. OP replies to round it off. Wow guys, thanks for your stories. You've given me a lot to think about. When I was still in primary school, I had a friend who lived in what people called a haunted house. It wasn't that the house or the land had some notorious history to begin with. From what I was told, the reason it became a haunted house was that everybody in my friend's family had a very strong spiritual sensitivity. Because of that, that place turned into what it was. Anytime I went over to his house, there was a near 100% chance we'd run into something strange. The TV would switch off or on by itself while we were playing video games, and that was practically normal. The room lights would flip on by themselves, a sharp pan would crack like a hand clap in the air and echo around the room. The door would ease open on its own with a long kind of sound. Things like that happened often. At first I was terrified and I basically shrank into myself, but maybe because my friend kept saying things like, "Oh, this level's totally fine, don't worry," with this weirdly convincing tone. After enough visits and enough incidents, I gradually built up a tolerance, I guess. Even so, there was one place in the house that my friend, despite being used to all that kind of stuff, found genuinely frightening and absolutely refused to enter. The basement. If you stepped through the front entrance, the genkan, there were stairs to the right leading away to the second floor. Behind that staircase, though, there was another set of stairs going down to the basement. One day, when curiosity got the better of me, I started down those steps. My friend, let's call him Hiroshi, changed color and yelled, "No, don't!" and stopped me, practically lunging to block the way. Shaken by how frantic he was, I asked him why. He said, "There's something really bad down there, so I never go. None of us in the family ever go down to the basement." His voice wasn't this tough guy kind of talk. It had that thin, serious edge you hear when somebody really means it. A basement that nobody with strong Deikan, spiritual sense, would ever set foot in. A place that must not be opened. What on earth was the really bad thing that was down there? Or as what he described as the really bad one sometimes. That even a ghost-accustomed kid like Hiroshi would break into a cold sweat over. In me over time, fear lost to curiosity. Stupidly, on another day, I ended up going down those basement stairs. We were in Hiroshi's second floor room, playing video games, and I went downstairs to use the toilet. After I finished, I walked straight towards the stairs that led down to the basement. "It'll be fine, it's just fine if I take a quick peek," I told myself, and with that easy thought I went down into the basement stairwell. It was narrow, and I descended until I reached the door at the bottom. The doorway was unusually tight, so narrow that I couldn't help but feel that something felt off, even though I had no special sensitivity like his family claimed to have. Honestly, at one point, though, I was suspecting that this was some kind of big prank or something, just to see how gullible I was. But that was until I got closer, and I could feel, right on my skin, the atmosphere there was wrong, like it kind of pressed in on you. I couldn't have said why, but the thought slammed in. This is bad. I need to get out, and now. I tried to turn and hurry back up the stairs, but my feet simply wouldn't cooperate. It was as if the command didn't reach them, not one step. In that instant, it felt like something had taken a firm grip of my whole body. Cold sweat ran, goose flesh broke out in a wave, and I could do nothing but stand in front of the door, stuck. Right there. Bad, bad, bad. The thought kept looping, but my body didn't so much as twitch. Fear crawled up my spine and settled there. Then from the other side of the door came a sound. At first it was small, like someone tapping gently on wood. But then the sound grew. Bit by bit the tapping turned heavy. Then the blows thundered so loud that I thought my eardrums might rupture. The space boomed with it. Terror shook me, my legs were jelly, my teeth clenched without me telling them to. I squeezed my eyes shut, and even as a kid I understood that my life was in danger. I really thought this was the end for me. In the next moment, I heard, "What are you doing?" Hiroshi's mum, Keiko-san, yanked my hand and pulled me away from the door with a strength that didn't match her size. All at once, that gripping sensation vanished. My body turned slack, like someone had cut a wire, and I was crumpled where I stood. Keiko-san half carried me up the cramped stairs, one careful step at a time, and laid me down on the sofa in the living room. After a short while, Hiroshi came downstairs from the second floor, worried that I hadn't come back. "Oi, are you okay?" he said, hurrying over. His mum explained to him what had happened. Hiroshi let out a long breath, honestly exasperated. "I told you not to," he said, like he'd run out of ways to say it to me. Seriously, the basement is the only place you can't go. Mum and Gran put Ofura, paper talisman, on the other side of the door to seal it for now. If you'd actually opened that door, you might have died. Do you know that? What exactly was this really bad one that could kill you just by opening the door, I wondered. My curiosity only grew. Even so, I made sure to never go near those basement stairs again. A small aside, after the fact, my friend's family eventually moved. The house is now on the market and is a vacant property, but there hasn't been a buyer for some time now. I can't say for sure whether the basement's really bad one is the reason. Still, I can't shake the feeling that something is still living there, settled in, even now. This is a story from quite a while back. Please hear me out. I went to visit a friend who lived in a one-room, 3-tatami place. Rent was 30,000 yen a month. It was winter, bitterly cold, but once the two of us started drinking in that tiny room, it was surprisingly comfortable. Except for this, every so often a cold draft would slide in, like a thin blade of air. The building was old, sure, but the window frames were new aluminium sashes. I couldn't figure out where that air was getting in from. After a while drinking, curiosity got the better of me. I asked my friend about it. He said he was used to it. It's always like this, don't worry. After I used the shared toilet on the landing, I noticed something odd. The apartment was 2 stories. At the top of the stairs, the toilet was to the right. To the left, there was a corridor about 10 meters long with rooms on both sides. From the toilet looking left, there were 2 rooms. To the right, 3 rooms. I'd always thought the room in the middle, on the right side, was my friend's, or so I believed, but on the right side, there were only 2 doors. Because the left side had the staircase, the corridor was narrower there, so I figured they'd just made 2 slightly larger rooms on the left and 3 smaller ones on the right. At the end of the corridor, the door to the back left room faced you. Opposite that door, on the right-hand wall, was just wall, and not just any wall. From the far end, roughly 3 meters, that wall jutted out about 10 centimeters into the corridor. The corridor was narrow already. That portion was even tighter. Back in the room, I asked my friend, let's call him Kenji, but he said he'd never noticed. Fair enough. The bit in question was beyond his own door. Most people don't pay attention to what's past their room, I guess. I leaned out of Kenji's window and checked both directions along the exterior. There were windows exactly where you would expect. 1 on each side. No mistake about it. Next to his room, there had been another room. I wasn't going to be satisfied until we looked into it properly. The wall on that side of Kenji's room was built as a 2-tier oshire, a sliding door closet, so we emptied everything out of it first. At the very back, there were narrow matchboard panels, about 20 centimeters wide, set side by side. From the gaps between them, cold air was slipping through. So that strange draft we kept feeling was coming from here. I put my eye to the gap, but it was pitch dark. There was nothing to see. If the space on the other side was also a wardrobe, then with the fusuma, the sliding panels, closed, you would never see anything, anyway. Even Kenji, who's normally unfazed by this kind of thing, started to look uncomfortable. From outside, the hidden room's window couldn't be seen because other buildings blocked that view. In any case, if we were going to investigate, daylight would be less unnerving. We made a plan to visit Kenji's building in the light of day. The next day we returned and resumed our investigation. Even in daylight, the gaps in the backboards were utterly black. We tried a torch, but the slits were too narrow to get any light in at a useful angle. While we were checking the corridor, the neighbor from the room opposite came out. We explained the situation. He said it never struck him as strange. That made sense. Only a tenant would know a room's inner layout. From the corridor, it just simply looks like a larger, single room. You wouldn't guess that there's an extra, inaccessible space. In other words, only someone living in Kenji's unit would ever realize there was a hidden room there. The corridor wall itself felt solid, and was painted the same color as the walls. Apart from that odd section that jutted out, nothing looked amiss. There wasn't much more we could do on our own, so we decided to ask the landlady about it. The landlady, Sato-san, was a kindly-looking woman in her 50s, but when it came to the mysterious room, she wouldn't say a word. She told us to ask the management company. At the management office, the assigned staffer, Tanabe, came out and right off the bat started talking about the hidden room. So the landlady must have phoned ahead. He gave us a bunch of small explanations. The short version: it isn't a room at present, it's just being used as a storeroom. He didn't explain the lack of a door at all though. As far as I know, it's always been like that, ever since I joined the company, he said. Maybe a contractor's mistake during work, he added, like he was thinking out loud. After that explanation, he pulled out the lease and said, "Look, we can reduce the rent to 25,000 yen. How about that?" Kenji said that he needed some time to think and went back to the apartment. On the way back, we decided that we were going to enter the adjoining space, that hidden room, to have a look for ourselves. If we found anything bad, Kenji would cancel his lease. If nothing turned up, he'd stay put, with a little discount on his rent. To be honest, we also wondered if in a pinch we could secretly use that space next door without anyone knowing. That was our thinking at the time. It looked like we could get in by cutting the matchboard at the back of the oshiire, the wardrobe. So we went to the hardware store for some tools and got started right away. We were seriously determined to find out what was in there. We figured we could just repair any damage ourselves and no one would be the wiser. So we chose 2 boards from the upper tier. They looked the easiest to work on. First, we used a hand drill to make a hole about 3 centimeters across. Then we started cutting from there with a saw. The boards were only about 1 centimeter thick, so I thought it would be quick. But we were amateurs. It didn't go fast. We relied on the drill a lot. And eventually, by around 4 o'clock, we'd opened a hole roughly 50 centimeters tall by 40 centimeters wide. We started at around 2, and it had taken 2 hours. While we were working, we noticed something stuck to the back of the boards, mixed in with the sawdust on the drill and the saw teeth. There were bits of paper. When we pulled the boards free, we saw what it was. Ofuda, paper talismans. That gave us pause. It felt a bit reckless to keep going, but for the time being, we decided to go in. As our eyes adjusted, the outlines of a dim room emerged. It looked to be about 6 tatami in size, a corner room with 2 windows. Both of those windows were boarded over with plywood. The front door to that space was still there, but judging by the corridor outside, it probably wouldn't open. Then we noticed something odd about the walls. There was a pattern. We clicked on the torch and swept the beam across the wall, and we sucked in a breath. The pattern was hundreds of those ofuda, those paper talisman, pasted all over the walls. They were on the door, the boards blocking the window, even inside the wardrobe opening, where my head was poking through. Everything was smothered in talismans. I stayed where I was, locked up by a kind of fear that felt very old and very practical at the same time. From behind me, Kenji called out. He told me to move so he could see. We swapped spaces at the hole. Once he saw inside, he was speechless. We decided to enter and take a proper look. Kenji was first through that narrow opening, then me. We climbed into the room. Inside, talisman were pasted on the floor and the ceiling as well. Every inch of the room was covered. White ones and red ones all jumbled together. Apart from that, there was nothing in particular. No furniture, no smell of rot, just talismans and sealed openings. Kenji looked like he was already weighing up whether to move out. And that's when there was a bang, a huge one. It came from within the room. We stared towards the sound, but there was nothing there. Then the same sound could be heard again, from all around the room in quick succession, so strong that you could feel the vibrations in the boards. It was the sound of something very heavy striking the walls. It felt like blows were coming from the inside. The noise and the tremor grew and grew until it seemed like the whole building was shaking. Standing up became difficult. Both of us lunged towards the hole we had created in the closet at the same time. As we scrambled to squeeze through, something grabbed my ankle. Kenji's hand, I thought, and yanked. I fought to get free. Panic makes you use your elbows, and I tumbled into Kenji's room. Kenji was already inside, safe. More than that, he was in before me. Then he said, "Why did you pull my leg?" I stared at him. I mumbled something about being flustered and let it drop. There was a commotion outside, so we went out. People from the building and nearby residents had gathered in a small crowd. Apparently the banging and shaking we'd experienced inside had been audible outside as well. Everyone was alarmed. We played along, talking with worried faces, and little by little, people dropped off. Back in the room, we put the matchboards back, fixing them with a sheet of plywood and the nails we bought. Originally, we planned to just cap the opening with plywood, but the old footer pasted to the backs of the boards bothered us, so we nailed the boards onto the plywood first, and then used the plywood as the cap. Kenji grabbed as much as he could carry and came to stay at my place. The next day he cancelled the lease, hired movers to handle everything, and never went back there. I didn't go near there again either. Why am I remembering all this now? Because I met Kenji the other day. These days we each have families and live far apart. But he had a business in town and messaged me. "Let's get a drink." First time in 15 years. We swapped old stories from our student days and stupid things we'd done, and eventually we got to that apartment. The memories came back in sharp detail. Kenji said he'd gone to look for it a few years later. It was in Sangenjaya. There was nothing left of how it used to be. Not just the building, the road itself had been redone. He couldn't even pin down the spot. Hearing that, I felt an odd sense of relief. Time had dulled it a little, but the place that felt like the source of that fear was gone. After that, we chatted about nothing in particular, and around midnight we called it a night. But there was only one thing I think we both always wanted to ask. A question from right after the incident. A question that had never gone away. For myself, I knew the answer. As for Kenji, I was sure. No, certain. He had the same answer. After what happened, we never went on trips together. And both of us always wore socks. Always. In fact, the way we wore socks all the time, no matter how hot it was, might be what settled it. I think Kenji wanted to ask me, "Do you have it too? The hand-shaped bruise on your ankle?"